Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for being with us today, and big thanks to DPW for having us up on stage today. Michelle, I've really been looking forward to our chat today.
Me too.
Awesome. Well, we should probably start with some introductions. I'm Barron. I have over 16 years in procurement. I spent quite a few years in the market research industry and then made the jump to tech at Procore Technologies, where I led the procurement team there and was a Vendr customer. Now I'm a part of the Vendr team, where I build out our procurement expert function that we offer to our customers every day. But more importantly, I'm here with procurement powerhouse, Michelle Vita of Datadog, who is also a Vendr customer. Michelle, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. So happy to be here. I'm Michelle Vita. I am Senior Director of Procurement at Datadog. I started my procurement career in private real estate and development. True story, first question on the job was, what is procurement? Straight to the Chief Procurement Officer. So it's been a long and challenging road since then. After that, I went over to a real estate tech company. And after that, I went to Datadog. I've been there for about 3.5 years. So first procurement hire at the organization, and have had the wild ride of building it from there.
Wow, awesome. Well, Michelle, when we were discussing this panel, we had a bit of a recurring theme. So I know both of us were talking about, and I'm sure many of you talk about this as well, we're seeing SaaS purchasing continue to evolve, and it's becoming a bit more challenging to optimize at times, especially with the recent economic events. So let's start at the very beginning. Let's address the topic of this discussion. Michelle, what is the SaaS vortex, and how are you tackling it?
Yep. I mean, I definitely think that SaaS is just exploding, and it's certainly one of the biggest buying categories that my team has to deal with, and it just continues to grow. And I think in the particular challenge that I've had at my company is that when I started, it was pre-IPO, it was still operating very much like a startup. So we had a lot of softwares that I then needed to sort of pull back and kind of negotiate them in a better way. And we've moved away from sort of this buy as many licenses as we could possibly grow into, and we'll get there one day. So now we've kind of moved more towards a buy as you go model for licenses. And I think what that does is, obviously, it helps us save money. It helps us be a little bit more conservative, because I think in the past, we've been quite overzealous with the way that we've purchased. We would have licenses just sitting on the shelf, and frankly, that's just money that really goes to waste. So, like I said, we've implemented a buy-as-you-go strategy, but I really think that it comes down to so much more than saving money, right?
Sure.
We try to empower internal stakeholders to really think about it as a bigger picture. So, in procurement, again, it's so much more than just saving money, right? You kind of need to be this bridge, that sort of bridges gaps together between these internal teams to make our strategy better when it comes to buying. So for example, yes, again, we think we're going to grow to this crazy number of employees, and absolutely we'll need those licenses one day, but there's really some things that need to happen to make sure that you're actually purchasing correctly, like proper management of all of these SaaS tools, auditing those licenses, ensuring that there's the proper utilization of those licenses. For example, if there's different tiers of licenses, you have the top tier where you need all of the functionality of the system, and then maybe you need somebody that has just a viewer license, which is obviously, as we know, a lot cheaper, right? So it's been a lot of exercises like that with our internal teams to kind of get them to think in a different way. So when we do approach these SaaS contracts, that we have all the information that we need, and we can make really strong decisions with our negotiations. And also, I think we just have to do more with less in this economy. And I think a lot of it has to do with freeing up your team from any administrative burdens that they're dealing with, so they can actually be a strategic arm during these negotiations and these conversations. If they're totally bogged down by the day-to-day, they're not going to really be able to add value because they need everything to just keep moving and moving. So trying to really automate those processes has been a huge win for me and my team.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really glad to hear that you feel you're making headway there, because I know many of us have seen this for a couple to a few years now, right? I mean, the doing more with less. We saw when the pandemic started a need to reduce, a need to get more lean and scrappy, and now with the current economic climate, I think that challenge has resurfaced, right? And so I think you make a really good point of, we have these great pie in the sky ideas. You know, let's get those 500 licenses, maybe take advantage of some discounting, but are they going to sit on the shelf? Are we actually paying for what we use, or are we just paying for
Exactly.
things?
And when you're in the really fortunate situation that, you know, my company is in, it's going to organically grow. So it'll get there, and that's really one of the negotiation tactics that we use with our SaaS vendors.
That's great. And you made a great point earlier where you stated basically procurement has so much more to offer during transactions, which I think we're all advocates of and can struggle with at times. So Michelle, in our past conversations, you've described to me sort of two different procurement personas. Can you share a bit more about those two personas, and how do you see each faring in the SaaS vortex?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely two different types of procurement people. There's obviously classic, very traditional 7-step process, going out to bid, assessing the market, gathering in sealed bids. This is exactly what I was doing at my first company, very traditional. And then you sort of have this kind of new procurement professional that's a little bit more strategic and agile and more of a jack of all trades. And you know, I think that the industry in general is really evolving to be more towards that jack of all trades type. And you know, I mean, last night we were having a conversation when, you know, we were at the opening party, and somebody mentioned like, wow, it's such a young and like, you know, really sort of powerful vibe in the room. And I think it's just a different industry now. And I think that really has a lot to do with just like the explosion of SaaS. It's just a different type of person. And I'm incredibly lucky that my team is filled with these jack of all trades types that you can put them in front of a project and they can think outside of the box, think outside of the process, and, you know, really, you know, make it the best strategic plan moving forward.
That's awesome. I love the word agility when it comes to procurement. We hear it all the time, but I don't think we actually see it in practice enough, right? We spend a lot of time with our customers trying to move them into the agile space, and I know it's challenging. It takes work, it takes time, but we've seen our customers get such an edge when they move towards a more agile way of working within procurement. So one thing though that sort of constantly comes up is that becoming agile takes time, right? So Michelle, if you are able to free up time, what would you suggest procurement leaders spend their time on? What sort of strategic initiatives?
Yeah, I am a big fan of, you know, like I said earlier, sort of looking at the end-to-end process and what your team has their hands on and what is taking human touch and taking time, and spending your time automating those processes. So I feel like I personally, like my mind works like a system, and I'm always looking for like automations. Even in my own life, I'm like, great, what am I spending time on? Turning the coffee pot on? I'm going to set that on a timer so my coffee is ready when I wake up in the morning, right? So like with my team, I'm just always looking at what are they spending their time on and how can we automate that? So we've spent a ton of time this year automating different processes within our day-to-day. So my team was spending a ton of time following up with people, following up with vendors on, you know, when are they going to sign something, following up with our internal stakeholders on when they're going to click approve in our purchasing system, right? So we implemented robots to do all of that. We were spending a ton of time taking our contracts and passing them over to legal, right? Because they have an entirely different system that they use, of course, right?
Sure.
Because nothing can be easy. So we've integrated both of these systems, and those contracts just flow back and forth with ease. We've integrated our purchasing system with our e-signature tools, so we no longer need to keep on top of all of those signature requests that are out to our vendors and also our leadership. What else have we done? We've spent a huge amount of time looking at where we were spending most of our efforts in the negotiation and contract execution process. So we were looking, we're like, wow, we're always using our vendor's paper, which of course is a brand new review every single time.
Right.
So what we did was we started implementing contract templates, right? Prior to this, legal had to look at absolutely everything. Now that we have templates, procurement can look at those things and approve them on behalf of the company. So all of these things have really sort of made the process a lot more efficient. And then my favorite project that we've worked on that I feel is now like an inside joke between us because we always talk about it. My team was really spending such a great amount of time training people and answering questions. And, you know, it's the same questions over and over. You know, and of course, sometimes you do need to have a really harsh conversation with yourself. Like, if people have this many questions about the process, maybe the process needs to change and it's not that great. But in certain scenarios, sometimes we just can't keep up with the amount of growth that our company is going through, and we can't always get in front of people to train them. Some people don't like to watch a video. Some people, you know, want to have sort of a one-on-one, but we're implementing a tool that kind of sits on top of our purchasing system and our intake tool. And it's like that Microsoft paperclip that would sit in like the side of, you know, Microsoft Word. It's like, hey, do you need help? And you click on it, and then it will literally bring your mouse to exactly where you need to go and submit your intake, and then, you know, of course, guide you through the process. And it's just, I love this project. I think it's gonna make such a difference. And yeah, those are some of the things that we've done to, you know, really release the administrative burden for my team.
That's awesome. I am imagining that little paperclip guy right now. I can see him in my mind's eye. I love that you're being so thoughtful there because I think stakeholder education is such a challenge, right? And it does take up a lot of time. And so what I'm hearing is that you're enabling your stakeholders to get what they need to know versus sort of giving them every piece of information, right? I think that's often a misstep that we take in procurement is we overcomplicate process and policy, right? It's so important to us and it's so important to finance, right? All of these rules and all of these things, but truly your stakeholders don't need to know all of that. They only need to know what they need to know to get a purchase done and to adhere to policy, right? So I love the little, would you call it a bot then?
Yeah, it's a bot.
Okay, and I'd love to kind of talk about this a little bit more if we can, as I still imagine the Microsoft paperclip in my mind. How did you actually identify that you needed this solution? Was it stakeholder feedback? Was it speaking with your team?
Yeah.
And how are you implementing it?
Yeah. So a lot of it was stakeholder feedback. In January, we actually sent out a survey to our internal stakeholders for feedback on our processes, which you certainly have to prepare for that moment and for the very honest feedback that people like to give in a survey that's completely anonymous. So, you know, we went through a lot of the feedback and, you know, training just kept coming up and coming up. You know, and we already had a lot of resources for people. We had guides, you know, we had Udemy videos, we had all sorts of things, open office hours, but like sometimes you need to just have different types of resources for different types of people. Not everybody, you know, is going to learn by reading something. Not everybody is going to learn by, you know, watching a video. Not everybody is, you know, confident enough to join in office hours and admit that they need help. So we're just looking for other ways. And I mean, I think a lot of it also is just our own internal team's feedback. So typically what we'll do is during our weekly meetings that, you know, that we have with just the procurement team, if something happened during the week that we feel is something that should be shared with the entire group, right? Something didn't go great. We talk about that during our weekly meeting, and then we just all collaborate on ways that we can fix it. So this kept coming up, people are asking the same questions, we have so many new people starting, how, they're not watching the videos, how can we possibly get ahead of this? So that's how that came up, and that's really a huge way that we identify issues. It's just open conversation between the team. And I always tell them that nothing is written in stone in these processes. Just because I put this process in place when I was a team of one absolutely doesn't mean that it's the right way to do it. It probably means the opposite, that it's not the right way to do it. And I want their fresh perspective on it because they're really in the trenches dealing with the day-to-day.
Yeah, I love that. I think you and I both spend quite a bit of time with our teams really working on that transparency, right? And building that foundation of trust. And I think it's so important for us to hear each other and listen to each other and then take action on it. Because to your point, as leads of these teams, sometimes we're just noodle testing things, right?
Yeah.
We think we know what something should look like. We think we know what the right process or policy is, but oftentimes we are just taking those noodles, tossing them at the wall, hoping at least two stick, right? And so I always love how intentional you are with your team on iterating and optimizing.
I certainly try. Yeah, it's just incredibly important for them to also feel like they're heard. And they're the ones that are, the main pillars of my success. Like I would not be here if not for them. So I want to keep them happy. I want to keep them heard, and I want them to feel like they're absolutely contributing to the bigger picture and not just, carrying out steps in the process.
That's awesome. Especially as leaders, we're so often removed from the day-to-day, right?
Absolutely.
And so having those people that are truly on the ground performing this function, their voice is so critical to our success. So I really love that. You've mentioned a few things that have really resonated with me today. We spoke about agility and just how important and critical that is for procurement success. But you also mentioned a couple things in passing, working with your partners. Right, really, I think establishing those relationships and then using them to grow, right? To your point, you're now using your own papers. You have these templates to go off of. And working with your partners to accept that, right? And want to engage there, I think is so important. But, we kind of have touched a bit on the topic of getting strategic, and usually getting strategic, getting agile means getting your seat at the table. Right? And I know this is something you and I are pretty constantly talking about and evangelizing out, is getting your seat at the table. And so when you have time to focus on these strategic initiatives, one thing I work with our customers on is stop asking for permission to do your job. Do your job. Get these strategic initiatives underway. Use your resources, use your partners to give you time back, to create space for that agility. Get those initiatives underway, get some data to back up what you're doing, right? Whether that's stakeholder feedback or actual, contract data that you can leverage, and go to the table with that, right? Stop waiting for someone to ask you to join them and stop knocking on the door, right? Walk right through it. When you go with those facts and those, really, I think you can illustrate what you're doing, your seat at the table is right there waiting for you, right? So how do you see sort of that evolving for you and your organization?
Yeah, we've done a couple of things. I mean, one of the huge things I think is, one, identifying exactly what is strategic and what we will add value in, right? So one of the main things that we worked on was we really want to empower the internal stakeholders to kind of handle things that don't necessarily need procurement's touch. Because that way, we then open ourselves up to, when we have a seat at the table, be able to deliver, right? So the classic trying to fix everything and nothing gets done, right? We want to make sure that when we have the seat at the table, that we can actually deliver value, right? So one of the things that we did was try to empower internal stakeholders to negotiate on behalf of the company, right? And of course, you can tell people all the time, spend the company money like it's your own. But at the end of the day, people do not have bank accounts like a publicly traded company, so they're not going to be spending the money like it's their own. So what we try to do is just really empower people to think like owners, negotiate on behalf of the company, especially for these smaller things. Especially another main buying category is events, and that's not something that we really can add a ton of value on, mainly because there is such a short timeline to get them done, and a whole litany of other reasons. And we really want to spend our time on SaaS. So another thing that we have, what we've also done is, like our partnership with Vendr, for example. We've pushed off a lot of, transactional and tactical procurement to Vendr because it frees up our time to do more strategic things. So there's a ton that we've been doing to just sort of empower everybody to actually have time to add value to this process.
Yeah, that's great. And so glad you have found our partnership beneficial. Always great to have a customer say that. And we certainly enjoy working with your team because there is that true partnership. There is that ability for us to talk about these ideas, right? To discuss this and help push each other forward. And I think even to a certain degree, I love when we're able to have a little respectful discourse, right? To say, hey, well, this is what I think we should do. Well, this is what I think we should do. Maybe they don't match up, but let's figure out an inroad for it. Let's figure out how we have the same objective,
right?
But maybe our idea of getting there is differently. And I think I so enjoy when we're able to do that together. And I know when I was at Cohort, we did a very similar exercise where non-SaaS purchasing, we set up thresholds, sort of risk thresholds and tolerance of what can you as a stakeholder do on your own without getting procurement and legal involved. Legal's such an expensive resource for us, right? And their plates are so full. Oftentimes we don't have a legal resource dedicated just to procurement, right? We're sharing resources with sales or with corporate that, we have more than enough work to give them.
Right.
And they're having to pick and choose what they're going to prioritize. And oftentimes that's revenue generating work, right? So I think it's so smart for us to empower our stakeholders, give legal some time back, let them focus on the more strategic things. Let us focus on more strategic things as well.
Totally.
Totally love it. So pivoting back, if I may, to the topic of economic downturn. We've said it a few times in this conversation, we are having to do more with less. More and more so every day, it seems. But many of us are faced with a lack of resources ourselves, right? So that could be a lack of headcount, not a ton of budget to work with, or maybe confusing or messy data and processes. So how do you recommend that procurement professionals make the most out of what they really have?
Yeah, I think, again, this is like a perfect way to wrap up everything that we've spoken about. I am such a huge supporter of relieving your team of these administrative burdens that really do not add value. Because again, you can be invited to the table and you could completely not have the bandwidth to even add value to enforce these policies that you've spent so much time, working on. I really think that is the hugest thing. And look, it's a very challenging profession sometimes. Oftentimes procurement is seen as a gatekeeper and slowing the process down. So I think, try to make those meaningful connections with people within your company. Take the opportunity, maybe work a little bit extra and prove the value that the team can bring, and then that work is going to come in. With that work is going to come the ability to have more headcount and take on more, and that's how I've always argued the value of my team, and it's grown from there.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So we have a few minutes left, and you keep speaking so highly about your team. And I know I've had the pleasure of working with many of them, but I'd love to understand a bit more of your journey. You were a team of one.
Yeah.
I have been a team of one. I was a team of one at Vendr even. So how did you go about sort of identifying who you did want on your team? We've talked about this jack of all trades. You're very lucky to have so many of those on your team. So when you were going through your recruitment process, really, how did you identify those candidates?
Yeah, this has been one of the most challenging aspects of my job, I think, really trying to plan for exactly what the company is going to need, especially when it's growing so quickly. The first hire that I had, it's really interesting because it goes right into that sort of jack of all trades, like very agile and moldable person. So when I was going through the interview process to make my first hire, I was down to 2 candidates. I was down to a person that was coming internally from another Datadog department that was actually one of my internal stakeholders that has worked through the procurement process, so understood it from that point of view. And then I had a person that had, a ton of experience in very classic procurement, and ended up hiring the internal person because I felt like she had an understanding of the culture of the company, and she understood the process from, an internal stakeholder's perspective. So she is absolutely one of the best hires that I've ever had, and she has grown in the team tremendously. She takes on so many different projects. It's incredible to see how, she's grown. From there, I ultimately decided that I needed, another person on the team that had more experience with contracts in a very, sort of professional and like legal sense. So I hired somebody that, had worked as a contracts manager for many years in classic procurement, but had also sort of signaled to me that she could be very agile. So that was my third hire. And then at that point, I was like, okay, where does this team need to go? And we broke out the team into 2 different branches. So procurement operations, and then strategic sourcing, which I'm looking to hire my first, senior manager for that team to build it out. So operations is going to be the day-to-day and kind of, making sure that these processes and policies are followed. And then strategic sourcing, of course, is going to be, looking at everything in big picture and implementing a policy at the company of when we need to go out to bid, and how we properly buy things. So it's really interesting because it came at the perfect time. The job has been open for a very long time, to be honest, and I saw this coming. I saw the fork in the road, and I'm like, we're going to need to do this. And then, the position has been open for a long time. Been a very hard position to fill, and it's funny because the CEO of Datadog said, I think it's about time, that we implement a policy where people have to go out to bid, and they have sort of different types of scopes. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we're trying to do, So it's been incredible to see how the team has sort of, evolved from 3.5 years ago. It's a totally different, team, and it's truly incredible.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know we've really enjoyed going on that journey with you and seeing the team evolve, and we're just really excited to continue to partner with you and watch that evolution. So just because the rec has been open a while, let's do a shameless plug. So can people find that position on the Datadog careers site?
Datadog careers website.
Awesome.
Check it out. Strategic sourcing, senior manager.
Okay, great. All right, well, this has been so much fun.
Yeah, this has been great.
We do have a couple questions, but we are running out of time. So Michelle and I will be here the rest of the conference. You can likely find us out hanging around the vendor booth. I think it's booth 29. There we go. So come find us, or see us out and about at these sessions. We'd love to chat with you and answer any questions. But thank you so much for joining me, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.